which way's east, which way's the coast, but on the way out, behind those gunships, gone. I could see, 50, 60 yards, trees, everything, fresh pulp, fresh dirt, just gone.
So they were just blasting everything in their path.
They just walked point with their rockets.
Okay.
And just opened it up. And of course, at that point, it was like pick everything up, blow our anti-personnel claymore mines that you have to set them in front of a tree, so when you hit the clacker twice, you always hit it twice. You didn't want the thing exploding and killing you, and sometimes Charlie had a habit of sneaking in and turning the claymore around, but you never knew if that was the reality or not. But anyway, we finally packed everything up and we were running. We had to run to get out of there. And it was that feeling of being right on the edge of losing control. Am I going to stay in control or be totally out of control, Because when things had subsided, I had propped my elbow up, lit a smoke to see behind me, because what was happening behind me. And right here, eye level, there was a big chunk taken out of this tree. So whether it was part of the tree or shrapnel or whatever it was that grazed the back of my head, it was weak need time, but no time to go to the bathroom. We got to get out of here,
Okay. How long did it take for you to feel like sort of a regular part of the unit, or that you knew what you're doing, or did that never happen?
Well, I knew after that first mission where we never got off that ridge line and we got pinned down.
Yeah.
And in this hellacious long firefight, and we could hear them scurrying around. I remember there was a kid from the 82nd Airborne Division. His unit went home and it was transferred to us. And he was on his knees, wringing his hands, rocking back and forth, and his gun barrel was stuck in the mud, and all of this firing was going on, and I was yelling at him, and I crawled over and knocked him down and got the mud out of the muzzle of his weapon and handed it back to him and tried to encourage him to engage, but he was finished.
Okay.
That told me, that I functioned cleanly. I functioned and reacted and learned. I knew that I was going to behave the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know a lot of the subtleties, of, we always go down for water if we need water, things like that. Or, maybe I could change the way what I was going to carry and what I wasn't going to carry. Or, some of the subtleties of our missions, but other than that, I felt comfortable enough, other than, afraid or nervous, so, I was new enough that I knew there was a lot to learn. But and I knew the guys that I would focus on, who knew what they were doing, and I watched, and I committed to memory. You show me once, and I'm going to remember this because my life is depending on this. And so I guess it wasn't, it wasn't very long before I felt comfortable enough.
All right. And then you mentioned that you spent some time on Ripcord on and off. What do you remember about that?
I wrote about it. I could read what I wrote. It would take about maybe 5 minutes if I read it, the description. But aside from that, we had gotten extracted and went to Ripcord. I spent it this night. And I wrote about it in a piece called Night.
Mm-hmm.
And Ripcord had a bad feel to it. It looked like it was suffering from an incredibly harsh winter. and it stiffened. It was as if it stiffened against our alteration, and it would, it would like react with, stinging dirt and sand when a helicopter came in, and you got peppered with it. It was like it was its only way of pushing back at us. It was like it stiffened against alteration, and but it had an ominous feeling to it. It just had a dark feeling, and I knew Ripcord had been periodically receive mortar rounds or fire one way or another. And I knew it wasn't a place that I wanted to spend much time on, and they put us underneath for the night. We came in relatively late in the afternoon, and as was my habit, my life depended on my ability to know where I was at all times and what was around me and where to go for safety if things went south. And I didn't have enough real time to familiarize myself with the surroundings where we were on the part of Ripcord, but we were told to spend the night in this rough-hewn timber bunker that was underneath the muzzles of a South Vietnamese 155 battery. And one of the guys had gone and gotten what's called jungle wrap, or like an oiled paper that surrounded artillery and ammunition to combat humidity. And if you rolled it up, you could light it as a candle. So we'd stick it in the floorboards, the rough planks of this bunker, and to give us a little light while we ate our supper, canned sea rations. So we were inside this bunker. I think maybe four or five of us were in there, and it could have been a 6-man team. I don't quite remember. I think we may have been in a 6-man team, and maybe all 6 of us were in this bunker. And we ate our meal, and I remember I didn't like the fact that I didn't know what my outside surroundings were, but I figured if we ever got attacked or probed, we were in the middle of the thing enough that I wasn't that close to the bunker line, and there'd be time to react, and get out and find a fighting position. So I laid down, tried to go to sleep, holding my M16 and covered up in my poncho liner, and then the battery fired, boom, like that, and the concussion just lifted my body up and slammed me back on the planks. And of course, the concussion blew the candle out. Then, somebody relit the candle, boom, and then constant, light the candle. Because we wanted just it's dark and scary, a little bit of eerie glow of the candle was a welcome comfort, a bit of comfort, as was the guy next to me, that I'm not totally alone here, in this dark, dank, sweaty, wet, hole in the ground. And those guns kept firing and firing and firing and firing, and boom, boom, every time they fired, and finally, just the sheer exhaustion of the day and the firefight coming in, and just slept anyway. You just kind of resolve yourself to the fact that, I just hope I don't wake up dead, when you're 6 guys out in the middle of nowhere, two of you buddy up. You always buddied up, and it was 2 on and 2 off, 2 on and 2 off until the sun come up. Now, you sure you sure you're awake? I'm awake. You sure you're awake? Now, don't you go to sleep. If you get tired, you wake me up before you go to sleep. But at some point, you just resign yourself to, waking up, maybe all lined up with slit throats wrapped into ponchos that the NVA had a tendency to do sometimes, to a team or something. And you hope that that was never going to be you, And that's the way life was.
All right. So was that the one time you spent the night on Ripcord?
Yes, 1 or 2 nights, but that's the one that stands out in my mind just because of, So the next morning when we got up to go back to the field, I remember walking down to where we were going to get on the slicks and the Hueys, and there was a 105 battery down there, and I went up to one of the artillery guys, and I had a can of peaches, and I went to give him a can of peaches, and he said, no, he says, you grunts need that more than, we get that stuff all the time. And I said, no, you don't understand. I need you to have this can of peaches. Thank you for what you do for us. Then I set it down, walked off. Back into the field we went.
Right. Are there other particular missions or whatever that stand out in your memory or that kind of characterize what happened to you out there?
No, I don't think so. I think those, there were other missions like that, and it was always the same. We just, we learned to carry a heavy load, both physically and not only mentally for the task at hand, but emotionally, And if one of the guys needed a leg up, we gave it to him. We'd come back into the rear and go into ourselves, repair our own spirits and regroup internally, and then, of course, go out and engage, and we just became, really tight. We had no idea we were as tight as we were until, we came in as individuals, and when we left as individuals, and
you're all rotating in and out of the unit on your own calendar.
Right, and
yeah. Did you ever get time off? I mean, R&R or any time where you were not going to be on call?
Yes, I did. I had a 7-day leave and an R&R, a 7-day R&R. And on both occasions, the only place I could get to was Japan, and which I did. And I remember playing, going into this one Japanese bar. It was in a big basement, narrow, very long, and we came down the stairs. Everything was red shag carpeting, and they had the lockers, like in a bowling alley, the old lockers where you put your ball and shoes. So you had to take your shoes off, and way at the back, they had like a fishing sea decor. They had different levels with rope ladders and fish nets and things, and way in the back there was a piano, and I ended up playing the piano, and I was an aberration. I was this anomaly, right? I was this foreigner playing piano, and they offered me a job, and I thought, let's see, Vietnam, play piano, way down here in this cubbyhole, and I thought, no, wait a second. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, right? No, that was a big fear, I remember there was on a 7-day leave, I was in my fatigues. We stopped. There was a civilian aircraft that we took on my way to Tokyo, Japan, and the stewardess who was making over me wanted me to spend the night with her in Okinawa. And I came that close to getting off of that plane, you know, but it was the fear of the UCMJ, you know, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, that I did not have orders to be on Okinawa. And if I got caught in flying standby, you know, I mean, that was AWOL. That was not something that, you know, anything to take lightly. And, you know, so I said, no, I can't do it. But,
And what was it like just to be away from all of the...
well, it was, you know, it was surreal, you know, it was disconcerting because of all the civilians, all the activity going on. And of course, no one was aware of Vietnam. I mean, they were aware of me as a military person. And, but it was, you know, it was interesting enough. I mean, you know, the smells of the different foods and or a Japanese man would want to buy me drinks just so he could practice his English, because he was being groomed for his company to send him to America, and he needed the practice, and he was willing to, you know, things like that. You know, but
So you said that you did you stayed with this unit until about July.
yes,
Okay. And you still have some time left on your enlistment after that.
I could have extended 33 days and got out of the Army. But during this period of time, I had lost touch with who I was. I could not remember the color of the family car. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I pounded my fist, that would not come back. I knew that I had inalterably been changed. After that first firefight, when we came back in, on the slick, hovering and coming down and looking down upon those below us, knowing that, you know, us Screaming Eagles, us combat soldiers knew things that those guys would never know. And I felt this conflicting feeling of strength and power. But yet, there was something else that I was years away from getting in touch with. But it was that sense of being violated. You know, there were people trying to kill us. And it was hard to understand how it was that the government turned around and put us in such a place, such a situation, knowing what they knew. I mean, they knew about Verdun. They knew about Omaha Beach. They knew about Iwo Jima. They knew about the horrors of battle. And they went ahead and did this anyway, you know, with misusing some of the intelligence of the Gulf of Tonkin as a reason, you know. And as laudable as the goal of world freedom is, or, you know, the ideology of the domino theory of if one country in the Far East falls to communism, then the next one falls, and the next, you know, as laudable as all of that is, the reality is, you know, you have to make sure that you are engaging in an honorable endeavor before you ask guys like me, the working class, you know, to sacrifice. You know, and it was as if they didn't care enough, you know. So I came home angry about that, resentful, and but knew that I had been changed, because what was unuseful was pushed aside. What was required was an intense amount of focus on the trail, an intense amount of focus on the task at hand. And that's what I put my energies into and forgot about it, you know. they would take us at Evans out to a small range with our M16s and put beer cans 25 meters in front of us. And we would put it on full rock and roll, fully automatic, and spit 3 rounds out, 3 rounds. Try to get just 3 rounds without aiming, quick kill they called it, I mean, when I got through Camp Eagle, they had the big, like the El Rancho sign, that the cowboys would drive through coming onto the ranch, the big plank, all in black on black posts, with the 2 screaming eagles on either end, and in gold letters it was written, "There are 2 kinds of people, the quick and the dead." And I took that to heart, and that's what we were up against. So the thought of extending 33 days, I was too close to the rubber bag, and Ashaw Valley, and I went, no. I went home, and I had 5 months left stateside.
Right. Okay. So how did they get you back to the States?
I was brought into the orderly room and given my orders, and I think I had, including today, 3 days to get to my Freedom Bird in Camaraderie. And I was just a spit from the DMZ, and how I got there was up to me. And then there was one other guy from my unit, and so we quickly, turned in our weapons and processed out, feeling totally vulnerable because we had our weapons with us the whole time.
Yeah.
For these 10 minutes locked and loaded on the pad. Now no weapon, and I have to traverse the country to Camaraderie to my Freedom Bird, and they just essentially turned loose of us. Thank you, thank you. Here's your plaque for being in the air cab, and everything's good, and good luck. And the big lament to me was I didn't write down the names and the addresses of all these guys. I figured, well, we're never going to see each other again anyway. And we came as individuals, we're leaving as individuals, and we're going to be cast to the 4 winds. And all the whole focus was, how short am I? When can I deroast? From 364 and a wake up to how much time you got, and that's what everybody talked about, And a short timer would go, man, he says, I can't remember when I had that much time. I can't even climb up here on this chair, I'm so short, just to sit down to discuss it, And of course the short timers all walked with their short timer sticks and, with a little bit of a swagger. Their tour was going to be up and they were going home. And so you just waited for that. But I knew that I needed that 5 months in the Army, that buffer period where I could kind of go out and practice, and if I stumbled and failed, I could come back into the Army and, and 3 squares and a cot, and I'd be,
So how did you get to Camaraderie?
We were going to hitchhike. We were going to try to get down to the helicopter pad to fly out, and we threw in with this bunch that was driving the Eagle in a 3/4 ton pickup truck, and which they almost bounced us out of the thing, cutting the corner too close to get on the Highway 1 to go south. And I remember how scared I was that come this far and get killed in a pickup truck. So we finally got there, and then we got a short helicopter flight. I think it was, I can't remember, I think it was a helicopter to Saigon. Somehow we ended up in Saigon. And of course, some of the guys were going out for a beer, and I thought, gee, I'd like to go out, see Saigon a little bit. But everything was off limits to the 101st Airborne Division. I mean, everything. So me and my buddy, we had our, you know, the patch, obviously our patch was on our sleeve, but, you know, this sea of humanity was walking past this little guard post. It was just like a little, almost the size of a phone booth, you know, not much bigger than that. When the MPs were there, you know, people were going both ways, both civilian and military. So we just, you know, fell in with the crowd, and all of a sudden I seen this MP, he started moving over in front of us, you know, and he got up to us and he put his hand in my chest and he says, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" He says, "You know, we're on our way home, we're just gonna go get a beer," you know. He says, "Well, they may be going for a beer, but you're not." And that was a bit hard to take, you know, after what we've been through, and I can't go buy a beer, but the division had gotten a bad rep, you know. I mean, they'd turn us loose in the days prior, you know, years prior, and they just got a little out of hand, and, you know, maybe re-alter a village or two, I guess, or whatever they did wrong. But finally, you know, the command said, everything is off limits to the 101st Airborne Division. None of those people are going anywhere out except on official business for one, you know. So from there, it was, who cares, you know, I'll be out of here, and, you know, in another couple of days I'm gone, you know. And we ended up, from there, we got a plane ride down to Camaraderie, and then there were all of these guys, you know, along the sand and in makeshift little shelters and nighttime fires, and the mood was different. It was quieter. It was a little more serene. There were some, you know, brouhaha stories, and then I started bumping into guys from AIT that I flew over with that went to different units, and stories about this guy didn't make it, or that guy didn't make it, or man, this guy, you know, he fell for it, and, you know, and he re-upped to get out of the field, and, you know, by the time he goes home and blah blah blah, he's gonna have another tour, and he's gonna be coming right back, you know. And so we just hung around, me and my buddy, and I kept, you know, now we're on the list, right? You know, he said, yeah, we're on the list, you know, because you waited, your name had to be on that clipboard, you know, for you to get checked off so you could walk to that plane. Checked off. And you sure they called our name? They called our name. We're on, you know. You could see the plane to come in and lay over and land and pull in. And now I was scuffed boots and, you know, sun-drenched, you know, clothes, and walking a little taller than when I was coming in, and passing the new guys coming in. And I didn't give them the raspberries, and I didn't tease them at all, because I knew what was in store for them. And but that was my freedom part. And we finally got on, and there was an American Trans Air aircraft, and there were round-eyed American girl stewardesses. And they were just kind-hearted, and they knew we were just, you know, the happiest lot. We were going to get out of there, and gently coaxed us into our seats and make sure you're all strapped in, and then it was quiet. You know, no one wanted to jinx the thing, because we knew we were not out of there until wheels left the ground, and there was no rounds, no incoming. You know, is there going to be incoming? You know, because we lived to learn, you know, the sound of incoming versus outgoing, and incoming meant anything. Of course, as an infantry soldier, you know, the slightest disruption, we hit the ground. I mean, it was that dire, you know, for us. And so no one wanted to jinx that takeoff. And finally that plane lifted up, and of course the plane just erupted, you know. And then we were chasing the sun, you know. Well, we first flew into Hawaii, and we deplaned. We got to go in a bar, and I could see my bird. And of course they wanted us, when they refueled it, we would have go down this hallway and down this other hallway and then come out a door and walk to the plane. But I saw these double doors by the bar and the tarmac, and to the victor goes the spoils. And I had attitude. And this was the first inkling that I knew, that I wasn't going to fit right. Grunts were a little rough around the edge. And besides, I wanted another drink. And I waited till I saw the last guy leave the door. And I finished my drink and went out those double doors. And of course, they were yelling at me, but I walked across that tarmac. There was nobody who was going to keep me from my freedom bird. And then coming in back to Fort Lewis, the sun was coming up. And is the sun going to get high enough that I can see the coastline? Or is it just going to be dark? Straining to see out the window. Finally, a glimpse of the ocean, the shoreline, and knowing that, this is America. This is the world.
Before we continue, I want to back up a little bit. So you spent a fair amount of time at Camp Evans before you were going out in the field. And there's stories about life in the rear area bases and things like that. And there's two big ones that are around a lot. And one of them has to do with a lot of drug use. Was that something you witnessed at all?
No. No, I did not.
Okay. So where you were, the people you were hanging out
Yes.
with, that was not going
No,
on?
no, no.
Okay.
No, it was strictly beer. And of course, you had to have a higher rank to get in, anywhere around liquor.
Yeah, okay.
But rockets came, there were trips to forward fire bases to do work, and I spent my time, like on rendezvous, filling sandbags and bolstering the place up. And we were on a 100% alert out there while I was out there. An attack was imminent.
And that was while you were still basically doing your clerical job?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, so you were going out in the field there even then?
Yeah.
All right. And then...
And rockets came,
Yeah.
Because when two aircraft came onto the runway, Rocket Ridge was called that for a reason, and rockets did come. They were trying to hit the ammo dump. And of course, when I got to be a short timer, before my orders came, the last week or so, we didn't have to go into the field unless the whole platoon went.
Right.
And so me and my buddy, we had to go into the ammo dump, guard the ammo dump. And, now I'm sitting in the ammo dump, and maybe a little thing of crackers in the canteen and in our M16, the bandolier, hoping that the rockets didn't come and set the ammo dump off, But
All right. So the other thing that comes up a lot is discussions of racial tensions about black soldiers in particular not wanting to be there and kind of throwing their weight around on the base.
yeah, we in my platoon, we were all in the same boat together, and there were a couple of guys that maybe kind of, we had a couple of black guys, and I don't remember befriending them necessarily, but not, it wasn't like he was one of my buddies, but I was not at all prejudiced against him, There were a couple of guys that had that prejudicial attitude, and they'd say, if he got hit, would you go over there and help him? I said, hell yeah, I'd crawl over and help him, and I didn't understand, that was that was wrong. But and I know that there was a couple that didn't want to be in the field, and they were kind of not good soldiers. And that's probably why I wasn't necessarily close to them, It wasn't because they were black. It was because they were not stand-up guys, And whatever their attitude was, I don't know. They could have said, fell into, I've been misused all my life, and here I am still being misused, and I don't want to, extend myself, But I've, the statistics I've read after that, they were not overly drafted any more than us. The same percentage of population. There was less of them because they were a smaller minority. They were a minority, not a majority.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there were more whites because there were more of them. But the numbers were, percentages were the same.
Right. Okay. But basically, from your experience, and a lot of that, what was those kinds of things were not really part of your experience.
No, I had heard stories, some of the larger rear areas, but
Yeah.
I don't remember that being a problem at Camp Evans.
Okay.
Because Evans was basically, these line battalions,
Mm-hmm.
with line companies.
Yeah.
We were all infantry, mostly.
Yeah, it was the 3rd Brigade camp, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, right.
All right. So now let's get okay. So you landed at Fort Lewis. Now, do you get to leave home before you report to your next station, or what happens?
Yeah. I landed at Camp at Fort Lewis, and they marched us into a mess hall. They took our measurements, for our Class A uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Took us into a mess hall, and it was a shock to me. Clean, bright, and the chow line was beautiful. Metal trays. I wasn't used to this, and the guy looks at me and he says, "How do you want your steak cooked, soldier?" And I couldn't remember. He says, "You want baked potato or French fries? Come on. Rare, medium, well done." I stood there and I cried. I couldn't remember. And I finally said, "Yeah, medium baked potato." He says, "It's all right. Welcome. You're fine." And I ate that meal and went back to our barracks, shower, and get into our Class A uniforms. So went into the latrine and stood in front of the mirror and I tied my tie. I remembered how to tie my tie. Did a forehand knot, tied a nice tie. I looked good. I looked in my jacket. I hadn't put my jacket on yet, but my uniform was pretty. 2 rows of metal ribbons, CIB, balanced by a blue infantry braid. And as I turned around from that mirror, there was a line of guys behind me, and they couldn't remember how to tie a tie. And I stood there for the longest time, and I tied their tie. And they wanted to give me this, give me that. I said, no, I don't want anything. They wanted to pay me, or I must have tied 50 ties that morning, just to help them. And then we got our orders, got our money. Of course, we started to walk like we always did, walk outside, out to the gate, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, well, there's no deuce and a halves, there's no helicopters, where the hell are we going? How am I going to get to Chicago? Oh, well, we're going to fly, Well, where's the airport? I literally had to sit down on the curb to try to figure out how I was going to get from where I was to the airport. And then there was a group of us standing there, and then finally was, well, let's take a cab, and we'll pool our money. So we took a cab, and we got to the airport. We walked into the airport, and now the next complexity was like, all these different airlines. How do I get to Chicago? So I walked up to the information counter and I said, I have orders. I want to get to Chicago. And she says, okay, let me show you. She says, the first flight going to Chicago, she says, you have military right to fly military standby. So you can take any airline, any flight you want. And you can, the first flight is a Delta flight or American Airlines, and it's leaving here from this gate, or the next one, if you don't make that one, if there's no room on that plane, then here's the next flights, and this is the way you find it, So I finally I didn't get on one flight, but I was in time to wait to get on a United flight to O'Hare. And I was treated so kindly, by the stewardesses and everything. And I got off the airplane. I had blouse boots. I looked pretty. I mean, I was magnificent. Because I had remembered when we first got to country, one of the lieutenants that got up, one of the officers that indoctrinated us, said, when your tour is up and you go home, you're going to be standing 10 feet tall. That's the way you're going to feel. So the goal is to survive your tour, and when you go home, you will have made it. You'll be proud. And that's exactly the way I felt. And as I walked down this concourse, I decided, I called my mother and my father to let them know that I was in Washington and I was safely home. And I didn't want to let them know when I was landing. I wanted a bit of time before I met them. And I didn't want them to bring a bunch of people, just them, just to pick me up. And as I was walking down the concourse, there was a little girl and her mother, and the little girl was drawn to me, and she wanted to come and look at me. And her mother grabbed her and said, "Don't go by that man, he's bad." And that was upsetting to me. Because when I had gone home, when my friend had been killed to be an honorary pallbearer, I was in an ill-fitting, scratchy, winter issue uniform with a National Defense ribbon and a big, wide-brimmed army hat, and no hair, and I looked terrible. But I couldn't buy a beer. I couldn't buy a drink in any airport going, and it changed that much. And I walked into a bar to get a bottle of beer before I called home. And the bar was full. And the bartender passed me twice and I was having none of it. To the victor goes the spoils. Little rough around the edges, and I grabbed this guy's rock glass next to me and I slammed it on the bar. And I said, and the bartender looked at me and I said, "Now you're going to get me a bottle of Budweiser, or you're going to do it right now, or I'm coming over to this bar. You have to wait your turn." I said, "I already did that, and just take it easy, take it." He gave me a bottle of beer, and I said, "And get my friend a drink here." Of course, most everybody left. And this guy sat there for a couple of minutes, and I don't think he finished that drink, and he left, And I stood there and finished that bottle of beer, and then, because I was not going to be mistreated. I had already been through that, enough of that. And but it began the glimmer of, I don't quite fit in here, and I'm not quite doing this quite the right way. Because the proverbial question while we were in the NAM was, how are you going to be? How are you going to act? It ain't going to be like the way it is here, sitting in the dirt, with your buds, eating out of a can, It's going to be different, How are you going to be? And you're going to have to think about what you're doing. And of course, the talk about what kind of car you have or what kind of car do you want, and about girls and dating and wives and family and home cooked meals and being back in the world was all we lived for. So
what was your leave at home then like?
It was wonderful. It was warm, but I felt alienated. I felt comforted by the fact that I was surrounded by this loving extended family that I knew. But they had no awareness of what I had been through. Only my Uncle Johnny my godfather, who walked across
Yeah.
Italy. And we had gone, to a family dinner at his house. And my mother wanted me to wear my uniform, which I did. And I wanted to hug my godfather, who never wrote me a letter. My father never wrote me a letter. My mother did. And I had a resentment against so many people never wrote me a letter, and we lived for mail calls, so important. And but it was hard, I mean, I was slow to realize, that these guys were working stiffs. These guys, come out of the Great Depression. These guys, knew America wasn't fair. I mean, they didn't have that skill. They didn't sit and write, let alone be able to express something. But family was warm, and I remember I spent my cousin Nan, and who I built that fire out of stones in the Badlands as kids, because our families were so close. Our mothers were sisters, and she was more like a sister to me than a cousin. And her husband was working on his chemistry PhD out in Iowa, and they wanted me to come out, which I did. And there was a big thunderstorm, and I went into a flashback, and I was cowering in the corner, yelling about the incoming. You gotta get down, incoming. And I was slow to get out of that. It scared my cousin to death, and she still talks about that today. I mean, but I did those things, but I was, nothing was a fit. When I first came home and went to my folks' trailer, I remember cooking, some bacon and eggs on top of the stove, and a clap of thunder, and luckily the frying pan stayed on the stove, but I was on the floor. I mean, I was always diving. I wrecked skinned a lot of elbows, and dirtied a lot of pants and shirts. And then I would take walks. Just get outside and in the softness of the Illinois rains, and the gentleness and the quietness of it. And I would walk, and I could hear the patter of rain on top of the car, the roof of the trailer, hitting the brim of my boonie hat, squatting momentarily in the woods that were close by, just pausing to listen, and feeling this softer sense of environment around me. And then it was time to leave for Fort Riley, Kansas. And I showed up at Fort Riley, Kansas, and just a mass of men, way too many guys. And I knew there was way too many of us at this place, And they gave us an opportunity to eat. They finally brought us into an auditorium, and there were 3 tables. An officer got up on the stage in front of the tables on the floor in front of us, and we were all in the chairs out in front. And he said, "Well, as you can see, there's way too many of you people, you guys here." And he pointed at a table, and he said, "Now, if you have over 5 months, and that doesn't mean 5 months, but it means over 5 months left in your tour, you can go to Germany. Or 5 months and under, you can stay here at Fort Riley, Kansas, or you can go to Fort Carson, Colorado." And when I heard Fort Carson, Colorado, I started busting over tables and chairs. I wanted out of Kansas, to me, it was the wide open spaces of Colorado where there was vista, you know, where I could see, you know, and experience, you know, the independent spirit of the West, you know. I thought, I belong in the mountains, you know. I spent my time in the mountains, you know. I think I can hang, you know, I want this. And there was a guy there from my AIT unit that had a car. So me and my buddy from the platoon, you know, we had ran into each other at Fort Riley. You know, we de-roast together, you know, went home, and now we were going to Fort Carson, Colorado together. So we piled into this guy's car and went as fast as we could, got a motel and bought some beer and booze, one with a pool, and we just stayed until the money ran out. And then we had the audacity to try to get in the pay line, you know. Of course, then the jig was up, you know. And I ended up in the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division
Right.
at Fort Carson.
And what sort of job did you have there?
Not much. You know, they'd send us to the motor pool every day, and we just hang out, you know. I mean, there was nothing to do.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I had befriended, there was a guy from the 326 Engineers Battalion, and we worked with them. They were out at Camp Evans. And they would clear the LZs, and he was an artist. And he had wanted, his dream car was an Opel GT. That's what he wanted to come home, and he bought that Opel GT. So now he had a brand new Opel GT, and he was this artist. And at Fort Carson, they had a whole battalion occupied a building, one company to a floor. So they had these massive, empty cement block walls, you know, that had no pictures. And when they realized that they had an artist, they had him painting spread eagles and cross cannons and different, you know, the red diamond, you know, the slogans and stuff. And at the bottom of each feather on these beautiful spread eagles, he painted a peace sign, and they never caught that. And they finally caught him because he painted a peace sign on the cross cannon on the wheels, you know. And some officer seen that the spokes are wrong here. That's not what a wheel looks like. So they made him.
All right. And now, at the end of that, okay, you get discharged then 2 years after you go in. Now what do you do?
I stayed in Colorado. I wanted to give myself some time before I engaged. I didn't want family trying to fix me or try to tell me how I was supposed to be or live. And but I didn't even know how to go buy a new pair of Levi's. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do for work. You know, the goal for me was just to get out of the Army, just like the goal was to just get out of Vietnam. You know, I mean, I was very short-sighted. And of course, to the victor goes the spoils. And I had this sense of immediacy, of self-gratification, you know, what is it that I want and what do I want right now? I had no ability to see long term or go down, you know, reach out into the future at all. And I ended up staying in Colorado, and I befriended some people, and, you know, that they liked me almost amazed me, you know. At first I ended up, you know, with 2 other guys, and we rented a house in Manitou Springs, and I can remember standing there as it snowed and watching it, you know, almost snow below us, you know, and the sparkling lights of Colorado Springs off in the distance. But I was trying to expel this dankness, this heaviness that I carried from Vietnam. I wanted to be refreshed. I wanted to be cleansed. I wanted to try to find some peace in my life, and it was a struggle. And we ended up, there was 8 of us, 4 girls and 4 guys. I think one was a couple, and the rest of us were just buddies. We used to go to the dog races together. We just palled around, and they helped me, begin to, get used to being back in the world a little bit. And then finally there was the Illinois Veteran Scholarship Program, where I could, the state of Illinois would pay for my tuition and fees, and all I had to do was pay for books, and I could get back into college,
Okay, so you've got the opportunity now to get a full ride.
Right.
And so where do you go to school, or what happens to you next?
Before I left Colorado, what helped save my sanity was music. And I was beginning to tap back into this countercultural movement. The music, just as I was getting drafted, the late 60s, come 68 and 69, because we had the Beatles, obviously, but that was 3 guitars and drums. And that was 63, 64, 65, 66. But there were other bands like the Stones. And when I came back home, I was hearing things like, of course, before I was drafted, there were things like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or Elton John. There was more ensemble, more nuances, more changes within a song, and different technology was changing. Musical instruments were changing, and musicians, these artists were expanding and experimenting. And so when I came home, Led Zeppelin, the Stones, Santana, all of these things began to stir feeling in me. I was some time away from emotional literacy of understanding, excitement is the precursor to passion, and things like that. But I knew that I used to play. I used to play in an ensemble, and I missed the camaraderie of the buds, that I left, and I no longer had that connection. And before I had been drafted, I had learned to play the drums, and played, like I said, I would job out with anybody anywhere. I probably played in half the gin mills in Lake County, Illinois, and I didn't care whether I got paid or not. And so I had my drums sent to Colorado, and there was these cats from the NORAD Jazz Band in Colorado Springs, and they were from like Stan Kenton's band, and Count Basie's band.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys were the real deal. And to avoid the draft, they all joined the Air Force and special services so they could play. And there was a band that they would come down and play at this nightclub. And I befriended a couple of them enough that I was after them. Come on, let me play with you, let me jam, and I was thinking, well, maybe we can end up playing out again the way I used to, on the weekends, and I can play drums, So they finally let me practice with them. They had a house in Manitou Springs, and they said, well, just bring bring a snare drum and a ride cymbal, and I showed up, and I tried to follow. There was a saxophone player and I think a trumpet player, and I couldn't feel it. I was flat. I was empty, and I thought, I've lost this sensitivity. I'm never going to play music again. And if all it is rouse this you know, listening to music and rouses this intense energy in me, you know, then that's, so be it, you know. I will live that way, you know, and you know, because it would stir me to, you know, the rush of a combat assault, getting in the helicopter and going for one more ride, you know. And if music can just, whatever is happening with it, I'll live with that. And I was convinced I'd never play again. So when I left Colorado and I got into this junior college down the road from where my folks lived, they lived on the state line between Wisconsin and Illinois. And I had this Illinois veteran scholarship offered. But their mailing address was literally Wisconsin. But I got into this junior college, and the uniform of the day were, you know, 501 blue Levi's, our jungle boots, and we wore our jungle shirts. And there were these kids in the local jazz band, and they had a young musical director that had a master's degree in music, and he was writing different charts and orchestrating different things, and it was a 19-piece rock jazz band, and they didn't have a piano player, and they were after me to come and sit in, you know, and I said, you know, I lost it. I don't have any feeling anymore. And they said, well, you know chords, right? And I said, yeah, I know the chords. I know chords. And they said, well, that's all the charts are. You just play the chords, you know, G minor 7th, or you know, C7, you know, sharp the 5th, you know, or whatever. And finally, I agreed, and I went to a rehearsal, and they put a simple jazz waltz in front of me, you know, several pages, you know, on the practice piano, all folded out, and I got lost 100 times. And then the director would go, letter M, you know, and then I'd find, oh, M, you know, and pick up again. And but it was there. The passion was stirred in me, and I could feel it. And so then we became a 20-piece rock jazz band, and you know, performed in college competitions and put on some local concerts and things like that. And I could go to a competition, and there was a grand piano with the top open and a microphone hanging in, and I could hit a chord, and it just like, whoa, you know. So I began this awakening of re-tapping into my core essence, because I knew there was a core goodness in me, the way I had been raised, and I had not lost my humanity in Vietnam. You know, there were those guys in the line companies, I could see them, you know, where they wore the ears and the necklace of the dead NVAs, the dead gooks, you know, and the ears, and I knew, you know, they had lost their humanity, you know. And so it just began this process of, I intuitively knew I needed to talk about Vietnam. I knew I needed to change. I was years away from putting the word I need to heal to it, because I was a combat soldier. I took care of me. I will fix this. You know, healing, I didn't, you know, that was about an injury. I wasn't injured. And whatever the burden was, I was used to picking it up and carrying it every day. That's what we did. And we did it either for each other, for us, whether it's emotional weight, whether it's the mental intensity, or just the physical burden of it all. You know, that's what we did every day. And I was going to be damned, because they said, well, you know, the VA, maybe you should go to the Veterans Hospital. They have these people you can talk to. And I said, what the hell do they know about combat? What do they know about what we've been through? You see, when I first came home, they hadn't even coined the term Vietnam Syndrome, which was really mostly about a political piece of it, of, well, let's not make that Vietnam mistake again. That's the Vietnam Syndrome. And the other half of Vietnam Syndrome was, well, we do have these emotionally troubled participants somewhat. And it wasn't until the 80s until they coined the term post-traumatic stress disorder as a clinical term.
Right.
None of that was in the vocabulary. And I was going to go to the people that sold us a bill of goods. Are you nuts? So I was convinced, that my dilemma was mine to solve. And but began this awakening through the music, and now I was playing again somewhat, and slowly I knew that if someone wanted to talk about Vietnam, I was willing to talk about it, because the proverbial question to me was, we didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. Why do I feel so bad? And it was fully 4 years before I felt like I fit in. And it was fully 10 years before I felt that I had attained some level of healing. But I was wrong. I was years away from truly attaining some level of healing. And that wasn't revealed until the early 2000s, where I got into the VA. But during this period of time, I was always willing to talk about it. So as time went on, come the early 90s, one too many people said to me, you tell a compelling story, you should write. And I finally made a decision that I would do that. So from 1970 to the mid-90s, I had enough time back in the world to intuitively know that I needed to heal and change myself, and became willing to entertain that notion. And slowly I began to put feelings or words and understand how it was I felt. How do I feel? What do I need? Became the two-pronged single question. And as I began to write, and I began to put these words down, I began to put words to this mental narrative and this struggle that I had been going through. And because I just had all of these stories that kept rolling through my head, most of which were the perplexing ones were the what if, the if only, if I could have, maybe this, and then something would be a little different, or this would have happened, or this wouldn't have happened, But the other stuff it was just the experience of it. And I wanted to leave my son something to tell him about what his dad had done. And that no doubt affected his life, because I had become a single parent. From the time he was 2 to 12, I raised him by myself. And of course I had my mother by this time. I wanted him to know his only grandmother, and I wanted her to know her only grandchild. And I knew that I couldn't touch him quite the way a woman could. And so she finally came and moved out to California when I was out in California. But as I compiled these things down, we had, it was computer, and I could edit as I went, so I wasn't concerned about all of that. I just wanted to get them down, and started this long process of realizing that I was essentially writing my healing story, this spiritual journey, this transformation of who I was as this gentle kid, and that loss of innocence and that struggle of within the turmoil of Vietnam, and now I had been engaged in this struggle afterwards to, just put some peace in my life, and I slowly began to put words to that. And when I got to the VA, they helped me put the emotional side to the physical side of the memory of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And that last piece of therapy that I had gone through, they used the word spiritual. There's a spiritual component to healing. And then I knew back in 1990, this is 2001, right? Or 2002, 2003, maybe 4. I forget when that last therapy was, but in 1996, one of the first pieces I wrote was called Prosthesis. So who fits the soldier with the emotional and spiritual prosthesis? How do we fix this intense inner wound that we carry, those of us that don't have that physical wound, that we're wounded nonetheless. And when I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2001, it was a validation. But yet now I'm less than, now I'm disabled, now I'm damaged, now I have this stigma, which was not who we are as combat veterans. We picked it up, put it on, and carried it every day. We are not damaged, we have capacity. And so it was a big dilemma for me. But slowly over time, this thing came together, and I ended up, putting it into this form. This is a book of my memoir of the impact the war had on me. It's not a war story,
right,
but it's a story of war,
mm-hmm,
and what happened to me and what I did about it. And I realized that I know there's something here that's going to help another guy.
mm-hmm,
That maybe he can find a piece of my story or a piece of his story in mine, or if I can help put some words to his mental narrative, that maybe I can encourage him a little further down the path.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it happens even with these interviews, and I get that feedback. But a book like that is laying out this whole process so much better. So the title of it is?
The title of it is Where the Light Enters, A Soldier's Journey. And the title comes from my wife at the time, would do her morning readings. That was her spiritual practice. And one of the people she would read from time to time was the ancient poet Rumi, an ancient Persian poet.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a saying, the wound is the place where the light enters you. And when I heard my wife say that, I said, that's the title of the book. Because the wound, I knew that I had, I'm the guy that can open up and receive the grace of healing, right? And, or I'm the guy that can keep it closed. And for many, many years, I could tell the story, and it was more about the bravado, kept the pain out of it. And, but it was through the VA that helped me understand how to let that emotional side of the story in. And then I found my editor in Salida, Colorado, and as I sat and had lunch with her, I knew she was the one I wanted to edit the book, because it's multi-layered. There's as much philosophy in it as there is social psychology or the psychological stuff, as there is the military side, as there is the historical documentation of the Gulf of Tonkin. And when I saw what was going on with Bush Cheney in Iraq, I mean, it jumped off the page at me, and I went, my goodness, they're doing the same thing they did with Johnson and the Gulf of Tonkin and use it, manipulate the intelligence to put boots on the ground. And it was just not okay with me. And along that journey of writing, I had not befriended, but there was a person a man that taught writing, who I avoided. I didn't want anybody touching my voice.
Right.
I was going to write this thing, and it was going to be the way I wanted to write it. And but he said he always told his students before they're done writing a historical account, particularly from a long memory, a long time ago. He said, go back as close to the place as possible before they're finished writing, because there'll be a sight, a sound, a smell, something triggers a memory they want to write about. So I made a commitment. Since I made a commitment to write, why would I pull up short? Just like at the VA, why would I pull up short and not acquire as full a measure of peace in my life as it was possible? So I made a commitment to go to Vietnam and took one guy, made no reservations, and all I wanted to do was go where my war was. And I wanted to look for some art and beauty and maybe a new set of memories and images to take home with me from the experience. And I ended up flying business class, quite unlike that C-141 cargo plane, and stayed in a 5-star boutique hotel in Hue, where they had 5 fresh squeezed juices every morning and an array of delights for breakfast. Eggs cooked the way you wanted, in a French pastry table or what have you. And I had my battle maps. I just wanted to go to my war where my war was. I didn't want to go with other veterans and see theirs. It was, I was writing my book. And I went to my young concierge, and a 30-some-year-old wonderful gal, young woman, and I showed her my maps, and I said, I think in the Ashaw Valley, where this old crossroads came together, was this fire base rendezvous. That was the first time I went to the field on 100% alert in the scariest place on the planet. Because my goal was to go to that place, the scariest place on the planet, sit on the side of the road and have lunch. Kind of spit in the eye of the demons, as it were. And I wanted to go where my base camp was, and I think I could go find Eagle Beach outside of Hue, where we used to go, the division would go for our 3-day stand-downs. And she said, she says, everything is restricted because of communism. The old battle areas are restricted, but she says, this will take some time. And I met her the next morning, and she had a signed, faxed letter, all in Vietnamese. It was essentially the keys to the kingdom that gave me permission to go to these places. And she had lined up a driver who spoke broken English. So me and my friend once again wound our way along the Perfume River outside of Hue through the mountains of Icor towards the Ashaw Valley. Only this time, the stakes were different, and I was carrying lighter gear and not sitting in the floor of a Huey, but in the plush seat of an SUV. Same kinds of vistas, overlooks, misty shrouds with certain sentinel trees pointing through the clouds, accenting distance a little bit. And we arrived in the Ashaw Valley, and she had arranged for me to meet a Vietnamese veteran. And I had no idea if he was an ARVN or an NVA soldier, either our former ally or an enemy. And we met him, and he turned out to be an NVA soldier, similar rank to me. Very standoffish, and they took me up into an upper room. It was like the Politburo, I mean, they had the commie flags hanging out, and they had their maps on the wall, and they were poring over my maps, and everyone was, it was like watching a foreign movie without the subtitles, but you knew what the dialogue was, and they were arguing over, who was where and when and what he did and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden everything was done, and we went back down and got into, back into the vehicle to go on our excursion, and only a different guy got in the car. And he had the Ho Chi Minh sandals and the gray polyester slacks and a polyester sport coat, wore the boonie hat, smoked incessantly, spoke no English. And he ended up being an NVA captain that fought in the same area that I did at the same period of time that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to hump the boonies with this guy. And we went up Rendezvous, they took me up Hamburger Hill, which shaped my war. I was essentially, because of my recycling and through my scheduling off and being a holdover and everything, I missed Hamburger Hill. But I was a replacement for that. And I think that's why my destiny was to end up in the 101st Airborne Division. And when we were finished, we went back to his place in Al Louis, and his wife had prepared just a scrumptious lunch for us. And every time, and at my insistence, he didn't want to join us, and I made him sit down and have lunch with us. And every time my bowl was empty, he stood up and put everything that was on the table, all the different dishes, into my bowl, and gave me the choicest piece of chicken still on the platter. And then, as was the custom of our driver, who went through this, a bit of a celebratory tea service, he would take small cup, fill it with tea, and then take that tea and pour it into the next cup, and then from that cup into the next cup, and from that cup into the next one, and then empty it into a living plant next to us. And then, and only then, did he fill the cups with the tea. And after lunch, we sat there and sipped hot tea and listened to the birds. Me and my former enemy. He spoke not a word of English. I spoke not a word of Vietnamese. And we connected. And when I told my editor that in Salida, she said, "My God, that's cinematic. That's in the book, right?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I sort of haven't written it all, but I have it in my diary." She says, "Well, that's your first task. When you go back to California, you have to write this," which I did. And it's the final piece of this healing journey, this spiritual journey that I found myself on. And I wrote about it. And it was life-changing. So for the second time, I left Vietnam with far more than I had bargained for. Both times. Only this time, it was, I had those images, and those new set of memories to augment the old ones. And I still carry the old. I still struggle from, day to day. Some days are easier than others, but I have this new memory. And so I thought by, putting that together, that, if I can help another guy, I mean, too many veterans kill themselves every day. And if I can save a life or give another guy a leg up just like we used to years ago, that's what we do as combat veterans. So I submitted it to the Military Writers Society of America, and they sent me an email and said, "We're giving you an award for memoir, and it's either going to be the gold, the silver, or the bronze." They wouldn't tell me, so I went to New London, Connecticut, and I got the silver medal. And so it says something to me about, how well the book was written, or they understood the purpose of it, the editorial review that's written on it. And my final line editor, the copy editor that helped me with the font and putting everything together, told me in the 20 years that she's been writing the book, doing editing, that my book was clearly in her top 3, and thinks that it should be required high school reading. And so, at the encouragement of my cousin, Nan, and my goddaughter, her daughter, I reached out to my local high school, and before I came here to this reunion, and met with the superintendent of my old high school district and the principal, and I thought, you're the professionals, just like I did with the VA. You're the professionals. You tell me what you see. Here's my truth. You tell me. And so hopefully they will see some value, to the book and as well. And so I'm encouraged, and that's essentially my story,
Yeah, and it is a truly remarkable one, and of course, and you tell it really well. So thank you very much for taking the time to share it today.